Hi guys, good evening. Okay. So how has everyone's labs have been working? Have you guys been able to do any labs for ASA, for firepower?
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit.
Okay. And no one else? So the image for ICE is uploaded now, so it should be working. Okay. For the ICE topology, it is 2.7 though, but that is fine. It does not make a difference. It's just a different web page and a couple of new features which you any which ways don't have to bother with. So apart from that, the topology should be now functioning. So just test it once, bootstrap it, make sure it's up and running, up and working. Okay. So 2.7 is now available here, and I tested it and it's working fine. Okay. So do check that out if anyone wants to do labs. Okay. So that is that.
I want to do that, Arun. So let it be a working topology. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it is a working topology now. Okay. Just would need to configure the rest of the stuff, obviously, the way that we have been doing. But the action node, it should now be functional. Okay. And I'll continue to use MyLab because we already have done quite a bit of configuration on the switches and on the ICE as well. So I don't want to go through all of that again. Okay. So
your version is 3.1 or 3, right?
it's 3.1.
Okay.
Okay. But when you're trying to do the when you're trying to give the exams and everything, it typically is going to be 2.4 or 2.7, one of those versions it is going to be. Okay. So again, does not really make much of a difference. It's just a rebranded, a newer looking UI. Apart from that, all the tabs and everything that I've discussed, that remains as it is. Okay, let me just power on switches. My router here. It's DMC box as well. So up until last weekend, we did not have any classes. Before that, we actually learned a lot of different things. We actually understood policies. We created policy set. We understood what the actual conditioning is, what the if-then statements are, what do a lot of these things do. We created this allowed protocols where we are only doing PEEP, MS, CHAP, V2. And then we created our authentication policy, authentication rule, okay? And we also created our authorization rules. And we created our profiles. We created one for corporate employees, we created one for contractors, and then we did a bunch of assignments. Okay. So anyone who is a corporate employee, we placed him into a VLAN 50, right? And anytime anyone is a contractor, we also configured or we restricted their access to internet, basically. So we used our DACLs, right? So basically we restricted HTTP access and we permitted everything else. And then anyone who is a contractor basically gets placed into VLAN 60. Okay, so that's what we did. And we made use of our internal identity. Okay, we made use of our internal identities. Now today we'll take a look at a couple of things. We already have our Active Directory integrated. Okay, it's operational, it's good. And we imported some groups, contractors, employees. So now we're gonna create some rules and everything based upon our external identities. Okay. So right here, we were doing our internal users, right? And in our authorization profile as well, we were just configuring we were using our internal user attribute or our internal user identity store. Right, that's the ID store that we were using. We're now going to use our Active Directory ID store. So let's come into the authentication first. We will still be using PEEP MS CHAP v2. We are still going to be using these endpoints here. Okay. So let me just power on both of them as well. So now the authentication first. So now in authentication, we're going to keep the condition as it is, but now we're going to change our identity store to, we can either choose 80 or we can choose our identity store sequence that we created. Okay, so let's save this. And let's go back here and see what that sequence is. So identity store sequence, the HQ store sequence, and this is the sequence. So it is going to first check in the internal user. That's it. Okay. So this is the sequence that we basically have created. Okay. And we created this in our very initial lab class that we did. So rather than choosing the sequence, let's just choose Active Directory itself. Okay. So now if both of these conditions match, which basically means if the authentication is coming over wired 802.1x and the EAP authentication is MS CHAP v2, I want to send that out to my Active Directory. Okay. Now the authorization. So currently with this authorization, my authorization is going to fail. Okay, because both of these attributes are not going to match now based upon the authentication, right? Because the attribute now is not going to be an internal user. So both of these rules are not going to match. It is going to match this default rule, which will basically cause a deny access. Okay, so let's test that. For that, let me just check the Active Directory. So we have a couple of groups here, contractors, corporate employees. And then we also have our users. We have an IT, IT1, IT2. So let's just use the IT1 here. Okay, it's a different one. So this is going to be the logon name, IT1. And he's part of the IT security group. Okay, so I'm going to create a rule based upon that. Rather, right now, just come in here. Properties. And this is not running 802.1x. So let's just enable .1x. So if you remember, we go into services. We look for wired auto config. And we'll start this. Okay, it's running. Let's come back in here. And we should now have this authentication tab. IEEE 802.1x. PEEP, that's fine. Let's just check the setting. We're not doing certificate based. That's okay. We're doing EPMS chat v2. Come into additional settings here. User authentication. This is where I'm going to add IT1. And I'm going to provide the credentials. Okay, and let me just check the switch. So this is connected on access switch 1, port E02. Okay, the CLI is visible, or is it too small? Okay, no one is responding. I would assume it's perfectly fine. So E0/2, it's the port configuration. Clear these sessions. Okay, support that we are connected on. Okay, it's doing .1x. Let's come back here. Let's do okay. Okay, okay, and close. Right, so we can see authentication failure here. Let me just disable and enable it again. Okay, so let's try. It's failing. Let's check ICE. That's the identity. Deny access authorization profile. Okay, if you open this up, we'll come here, bottom. It's evaluating the identity policy, selected identity source as 80. Resolving that identity, we were able to find that in the home.lab domain. That's the forest. the authentication succeeded. Authentication passed. Okay. And then at the bottom, when it's trying to evaluate the authorization policy, it basically chooses the default one. Okay, because what it tried to do, it tried to look up IT1 in the internal ID store. Okay, so the authorization profile does not or is not configured currently to look for or evaluate against the Active Directory attributes. Okay, so this same user here, the same user who was previously getting authenticated perfectly fine when we're trying to do internal users, right? So now it's not able to because we changed our policy. Okay, and from the switch here, you're going to see .1x, it tries and then it fails over to map. Okay, and that fails as well because that's how we have configured our default policy. So coming back in here again, we should see the map failing. This is the map failing. Deny access. Okay, so until and unless someone authenticates, we have basically denied access to everything. So the map request is going to this default policy set. And if we come down to authorization policy, we have configured this default action to deny access. Okay, so if a user does not authenticate, he basically is not allowed access on the network. Okay. Now let's change our policy. In here, we're going to add another rule. Add one here. Let's say employee auth 80. Okay. Now let's add our condition. Now the first condition or the condition that we need to have now.
Arun, can you do little slow, please? A little confusing for me. Okay. Only
Okay.
this configuration. Okay.
So we are just creating a new.
Yeah,
rule.
I understand that, but
okay.
Yeah, that is fine. So
okay,
I want you to little slow so that I can just follow it. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So previously we were trying to match the attribute of internal user. Now a condition or an attribute will match based upon our Active Directory. And if you remember when I showed you the Active Directory, integration, right now, when we verify the Active Directory is integrated, I showed you the groups as well. We want one of those groups. Okay. So if we open up the condition, we're going to add an attribute. And we're going to change our dictionary. So in our dictionary, we should now have, since Active Directory is integrated, we should have AD here. Okay. And with AD, you have a lot of these options. What we're looking for is external groups. Once I choose external groups, this is where I should have my Active Directory groups mentioned. Okay. So we are looking for the IT. I'm going to use this. Okay. So this is what my new rule or condition kind of looks like. So when the authorization is passed on to the authorization policy, it will first, or the ICE will first analyze this one. Okay, it won't match, it will analyze this one, it won't match, it will then analyze this one and try and communicate that and see if that user is part of that IT security group. If yes, then I want to give him the same corp employee VLAN 50 profile. Okay, And still, if anyone else, maybe someone from the employees group, from the HR group, from the sales group tries to access, he will again be coming down to this default action, which will be a deny access. Okay, so let's save this. And again, we got these groups because we have our AD integrated. And we have imported these groups here. Okay, so this is where we imported the groups, and that's why we are able to see those within the authorization policy or profile. Okay. Let's come back here. I'm going to do a disable, and then I'll do an enable again. And we should now, so we don't see any authentication failure now. Okay. Let's go back into ICE. The operation live logs. We should now see this identity. It's matching that policy, and it's matching that correct authorization policy that we created. And this is the result or the profile that gets assigned. Okay. Back here, if we look at show authentication session interface /2 detail, should see it's authorized. That's the username. That's the VLAN group that we assigned. And .1x authentication succeeded. Okay, it did not receive an IP address, and let me just see why is that. Core switch is working, edge is working. And on this access switch, if I also do show VLAN brief, we can see this interface is now in VLAN 50. Okay, but if we check the configuration for this interface, it still has that VLAN 100 assignment. But dynamically, we have moved that port into VLAN 50, and it's no longer part of VLAN 100. Okay. So let me just check the core switch. So this is where we have our DHCP pool. Okay, and I don't see the IP address. CP 50. That's fine. Was 0/2. Okay, so for some reason, it does not have the helper address command. IP helper address 10.2.254. Write the config. Let's try this again. Disable and enable it, port, and it should now receive an IP address. Hopefully. Okay, now it received an IP address 201. That's the MAC address 5009. Okay, and that MAC address, that IP address should also now be visible on the switch here. So previously, it was just using the APIPA address. Okay, it was not able to find the IP address. Should now have the correct IP address. Policy should remain the same, which is VLAN 50. And ICE should have the correct IP addresses. Okay, and if we open this up, let's come down here. Authentication was successful previously as well, right? So it's still authenticating the user against the Active Directory. That's the identity that we created. That's the forest or the domain. Authentication passed. And then if you come down, it's evaluating the authorization policy. It's looking up the user in Active Directory. The fetch succeeded. It was able to successfully retrieve the user group, which is part of the IT. Okay. Fetch succeeded. And then this one, whatever the result was, the profile was, which was this that we applied, it basically got applied there.
Aaron, quick question. This is not COA, right? So first is authenticated, then it's changed the VLAN. So it's not COA.
So
Change
this
of
is still,
authentication.
so this is still authentication and authorization. There's no COA here.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
But it's going to first, it's going to the particular VLAN, then it's changing to the different VLAN, right?
No, it has not applied any VLAN. It only applied the VLAN, or it applied whatever was present in here.
In the profile.
What we created.
Okay. Okay.
So what you see here, this is applied on the switch. This is not coming from ICE. This is manually configured on the switch.
Okay. The switch. Okay.
So this is not coming from ICE.
When this is set up, so this is the default one, right? No, even though default is according to the PC, right? That is whichever PC it's connecting to the switch.
It can be anything. You cannot have anything here as well, right? So I can completely remove this.
Okay. But where did we give this one default? So this switch port is default to VLAN 100?
No, so a switch port is only defaults to VLAN 1. So when we did the initial configuration for the switch, that's when we did this.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so that's your external lookup or your external authentication. Okay, so typically that's how things would be. Okay, that's how things would be in an environment, because you would already have some sort of a database present, which is typically going to be an Active Directory, an LDAP, or something similar. Okay, so you're going to reserve the internal database for guest users for temporary access only. Okay, you're not going to be using the internal data store for users. Okay, but that's kind of like the difference, and that's how you basically do the difference or tell the ICE where the identity store is. So if you're going to do internal, you have internal. If you do external, you have external. Okay. Now, this was from the perspective of .1x. Okay. Now, there might be some users who maybe don't have .1x configured, a supplicant not enabled. Okay. So in those cases, you would want to do MAC authentication bypass, or you're going to do MAB for those devices that do not support 802.1x supplicant. Okay, things like printers, IoT devices. So an example that we will use here is going to be this machine, which will not have, or which does not have .1x enabled. Okay. So when it comes online and it tries to connect to this switch, this is on E1/0. Okay, it does not have a config. Okay, so let's add the configuration for this port. So we're going to configure it the same way that we did the rest of them. Okay, so I'll just copy paste everything. I'm not going to put the VLAN. Rest, everything will be configured as it is. Okay, so now when this switch or when this device tries to come up, tries to connect to the network, the switch is going to authenticate it through .1x because that's the order and the priority. Since it does not have supplicant, either a native supplicant or the AnyConnect, it basically cannot do the ePOL start messages, or it won't be able to reply or respond to any ePOL messages that are coming from the switch. Okay, so switch is going to fail over to MAB, which is where the identity of the device, of the PC, it will be the MAC address. So it will try and authenticate through the MAC address. Okay, and we'll see if that path succeeds or not. So we have this port configured. You can do a show MAB all, and it will show you which all ports on the switch are enabled for MAC authentication bypass. Okay, so 02, 03, 1/0. So all three of these interfaces are enabled for MAB as well. But the order and priority is .1x. So always and always first try .1x. If not successful, then do MAB. Okay, so let's see if come up with anything. Okay, so right now we don't have stuff here. /0. Let's open this. Let's just verify if the supplicant is disabled. It does not have a supplicant present. So it does have AnyConnect. Okay, it does have AnyConnect, but it's not configured or it's not enabled right now. Okay, so that is fine. We're going to come in here, and it has the supplicant, but it's not enabled. So right now it's not doing 802.1x. Okay. So let's disable and enable it again. So it tries to do something. And we'll just wait. Nothing yet. This is just the 02 port. This is the one that's doing .1x that we covered before. I'm looking for MAB, which is on E1/0. Okay, so we don't have anything yet. So there can be scenarios in production. So there are devices, printers, and all the devices, and some other devices who are very quiet, okay, who are not very chatty, who do not exchange a lot of packets, a lot of traffic, okay. So, and I believe this is kind of like what it is happening here, right? So I'm not seeing anything on the switch currently. Let's just remove this. Okay, we're not seeing anything on the switch, right? So what I'll do is, there is another command that you can enable on the port. Basically says authentication, control direction. In. Okay, this will typically help the switch to kind of get working. Okay, and this is typically useful, the command, in case of such devices who are very quiet, who are not running 802.1x. So if right now this device would have been .1x enabled, right, there would have been a supplicant running. The device would have sent what? EPOL to the switch. If this would have failed, the switch would have failed over to map, right? So in the absence of this, any packet coming from this on the switch should trigger map, but it's not doing it. And it can be a scenario in production as well. So if you ever face such a problem, then you can use this command here. Okay, so I'll enable this. I'll do a shut, no shut on the interface, just in case. Okay. Come in here, let's disable and enable it. Okay, so we now see some activity. First thing is .1x failed. That's obvious. Why? Because it does not have a supplicant, so it cannot do EPOL. The switch failed over to map, but that failed as well. The port is in unauthorized state. Let's come in here. Okay, so when you would do map, you would want to have map in a data store, right? That's also an identity. So I told you there are two identities on the network. One is the user, one is the device, right? So right now, this device's identity is its MAC address. You can see identity and the MAC address. This MAC address is basically not present anywhere. Okay, so it's going to the authentication policy here. Map. So if you come into policy set, default, there's one for map here. Okay, and it's trying to look for the internal endpoint. Okay, now the reason why it went to the authorization profile is it's set to continue. Okay, so the user was not found. The user in this case is the identity of the device, which is the MAC address. Okay, so you typically would want this to be on a reject here. Okay, if it's an unknown device. You don't want any unknown device to be able to bypass the authentication, use MAB, and get access to the network. Okay. So you don't want it to go to the authorization as well. Right. Now, how can we add it to this store, this internal endpoint store? If you come to context visibility, come into endpoints. Let's see if we can see our MAC address 0B. Let's see. Okay, this is the MAC address 50B. Okay, and you can see what it says: rejected per authorization profile, right? So what you can do is you can click on this. If I check the attributes, right now it's basically showing as the group assignment is false. There is no static assignment, so we have not statically configured this. Okay. It's not part of any group. The identity group is unknown. So what I can do is, let's come back to our identity groups. We created our user identity groups. You have our endpoint identity groups as well. Okay. So I'll add a new group and I'm going to say lab map. Submit. So we created this new group. If we come back into context visibility, endpoints, I'm going to come to this edit button here. And it's a good idea to add description for production so that you know what that device is. Okay, we just say lab map Windows 7. Say static group assignment. I'll add it to, let's see if I can find my group. Okay. And I can maybe assign it to a policy as well. So this is a Microsoft device. Save. Okay. So now, if I look at attributes, static assignment true. That's my description. Static group assignment. Okay. So now this is not an unknown device. Okay. So we just added, just like we added the user internal identity to the internal identity store, we added this device. Okay. Come back to endpoints. So now what should happen is when we try to re-authenticate it, it should come to this default policy set. And it should now match the internal endpoint. Okay, and you should have a successful authentication.